The first thing they noticed about Abigail Turner was not her kindness, her patience, or the way she always stopped to help someone carrying a heavy load. They noticed the scar on her reputation. By the time she arrived in the small frontier town of Willow Creek, people had already decided who she was before she ever stepped off the wagon. A woman with nowhere to go. A woman nobody wanted. A woman who had been passed from one disappointed promise to another, until even her own shadow seemed tired of following her. And Abigail had learned something painful about the world. Sometimes a person could stand in a crowded room and still feel completely invisible. The autumn wind moved across the Montana plains that morning, carrying the smell of dry grass and cold earth. Willow Creek sat between two long ridges where the mountains turned purple at sunset and the winters came without warning. It was not a large town. A general store, a blacksmith, a small church with a white wooden bell tower, a few houses scattered along the dirt road. The kind of place where everyone knew your name before they knew your story. Abigail stepped down from the wagon with a small cloth bag in her hand. That bag carried everything she owned. 2 dresses, a worn Bible her mother had given her, a folded letter she had read so many times the paper had softened at the edges, and a small silver button that belonged to someone she had lost years before. She stood beside the wagon for a moment, looking at the street ahead. People were watching, not openly enough to call it staring, just enough to make her feel it. A woman near the general store leaned toward another and whispered something. The other woman looked over Abigail's shoulder, then quickly looked away. Abigail pretended not to notice. She had become good at pretending. "Miss Turner." She turned. A man in a brown coat stood beside the wagon driver. He held a small piece of paper in his hand. "Yes." He looked down at the paper, then back at her. "You were told there was work here." Abigail nodded. "I was." The man cleared his throat. "Well, things changed." The words were gentle, but Abigail knew gentle words could still carry a heavy weight. "What changed?" The man shifted uncomfortably. The family who requested help decided they no longer needed anyone. Abigail looked toward the houses beyond him. "Did they send word?" The man avoided her eyes. "No." That answer told her everything. She lowered her gaze. "Thank you for telling me." The wagon driver looked at her with sympathy. "Miss, maybe try the next county." Abigail forced a small smile. "Maybe." But she knew there was no next county waiting for her. There was no family expecting her. No room prepared. No person wondering when she would arrive. The wagon pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. And Abigail Turner stood alone in the middle of Willow Creek. For a few seconds, she allowed herself to feel the fear. Then she lifted her bag and walked. Not because she knew where she was going. Because standing still hurt more. By afternoon, Abigail had asked about every possible job in town. The hotel needed no help. The store owner said his wife handled everything. The boarding house had no empty rooms. Even the church woman who had spoken kindly to her earlier could only offer a small loaf of bread and an apology. "I wish I could do more," the woman said. Abigail smiled. "You have already done more than most." She meant it. Kindness, even a small amount, felt rare when someone had been without it for too long. Near sunset, Abigail found herself at the edge of town. Beyond the last wooden fence was open land. A narrow trail led toward the hills. At the top of that hill stood a ranch. Not a wealthy one. Not the kind with dozens of workers and freshly painted barns. This place looked like it had survived storms, droughts, and years of hard hands keeping it alive. A weathered house. A leaning fence. A barn that needed repairs. And a man standing outside fixing a broken gate. He was tall, with dark hair touched by a few strands of gray. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, showing arms shaped by years of ranch work. His movements were calm and careful, like he had learned not to waste energy on things he could not control. Abigail stopped near the fence. The man looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he rested the hammer against the post. "Can I help you?" His voice was not cold, but it was careful. Abigail held onto her bag. "I was told you might need someone." The man's eyes moved briefly toward the empty land behind her. "Who told you that?" She hesitated. "No one exactly." A small silence passed. Then the man looked back at the broken fence. "I don't hire people who don't have a place to sleep." Abigail felt the familiar sting. The same assumption. The same judgment. She lifted her chin slightly. "I didn't ask for charity." Something changed in his expression. "Not much. Just enough." "What did you ask for?" "Work." The wind moved between them. The rancher's eyes studied her. Not her dress. Not her worn bag. Her. That was something Abigail was not used to. "My name is Thomas Reed," he finally said. "Abigail Turner." He nodded. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you clean?" "Yes." "Can you work outside?" She looked at the broken fence behind him. "I can learn." For the first time, something almost like a smile touched his face. "Almost. Most people say they already know." Abigail looked down. "Most people have someone willing to teach them." That answer stayed between them. Thomas looked away toward the hills. The sun was lowering now, turning the fields gold. "You can stay one night." Abigail blinked. "One night. Until you decide what comes next." She tightened her grip on her bag. "I don't need pity." Thomas looked back at her. "Good." The answer surprised her. "Because I wasn't offering pity." He walked toward the house. "I was offering a chance." Abigail stood there quietly. A chance? It was a simple word. But after months of hearing every door close, it sounded almost impossible. She followed him. The room Thomas gave her was small. A wooden bed. A blanket folded neatly. A window facing the fields. Nothing fancy. But it was clean. And no one told her she was lucky to have it. No one reminded her what she owed. That night, Abigail sat beside the window while the ranch grew quiet. Outside, horses shifted in the barn. A lantern moved slightly in the wind. Somewhere nearby, Thomas was still working. She wondered why. Why would a man living alone offer shelter to someone he barely knew? People usually wanted something. Everyone did. At least that was what life had taught her. The next morning, Abigail woke before sunrise. Old habits. She dressed quietly and stepped outside. Thomas was already awake. He stood near the corral, watching one of the horses. "You don't sleep much," she said. He glanced over. "Neither do you." Abigail looked away. For a moment, they both understood something without saying it. Some people carried storms inside them. And some storms never truly left. Thomas handed her a pair of work gloves. "You help me repair the east fence today." She took them. "Why?" He looked at her. "Because you came here looking for work." A small pause. "Not because you needed saving." Those words surprised her more than kindness ever had. Because they gave her something she had not felt in a long time. Respect. Abigail followed him toward the fields. Neither of them noticed the rider watching from the far ridge. A man who had been searching for her. A man carrying a letter that could change everything. And a truth Abigail believed had been buried forever. Because by the time that letter reached Willow Creek, Thomas Reed would have to decide whether to protect the woman who came to his ranch as a stranger, or reveal the secret that could send her away forever. The letter reached Willow Creek before sunrise. But the man carrying it did not ride straight to Thomas Reed's ranch. Instead, he stopped at the sheriff's office. From there, whispers began spreading through town like dry leaves caught in a strong wind. By the time the morning sun warmed the rooftops, people were already talking about the woman living out at Stone Hollow Ranch. Some said she had run away from her family. Others claimed she had brought trouble from another territory. No one knew the truth. That never stopped a small town from creating one. Out at the ranch, Abigail knew nothing about the growing rumors. She stood beside the east fence, sleeves rolled above her wrists, struggling to hold a heavy post while Thomas drove it into the ground. The hammer struck again. And again. The wooden post settled firmly into the earth. Thomas stepped back and nodded. "Better." Abigail smiled without thinking. "It stayed straight this time. You learn fast." She laughed quietly. "That's because you stop me before I make the bigger mistakes." Thomas rested the hammer across his shoulder. "Everyone makes mistakes." She looked at him. "Not everyone gets another chance." His expression grew thoughtful. "My father used to tell me something." "What was that?" "He said a broken fence isn't useless. It just needs patient hands." Abigail looked down at the weathered boards they had repaired together. "I wish people believed that about each other." Thomas did not answer. He simply picked up another post. But his silence sounded like agreement. Days passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Abigail learned how to feed the chickens before sunrise. She carried water from the well. She helped Miss Alina, Thomas's elderly aunt, knead bread every afternoon. The old woman had kind eyes, and silver hair always tucked beneath a faded blue bonnet. Unlike most people in Willow Creek, she never asked Abigail where she had come from. One evening, while they shelled beans on the porch, Alina finally spoke. "You keep waiting." Abigail looked up. "For what?" "For someone to tell you that you don't belong." Abigail's hands became still. "I've heard it enough." Alina smiled gently. "Then stop listening for it." The older woman reached into the basket and handed Abigail another handful of beans. "This ranch has enough hard work without carrying old voices too." Those simple words settled somewhere deep inside Abigail. She had spent so long expecting rejection that kindness almost frightened her. A week later, Thomas hitched the wagon before daylight. "We need supplies." Abigail nodded. "I'll come." The ride into Willow Creek was quiet. Morning mist rested over the fields. Birds crossed the pale sky. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas broke the silence. "You don't have to come into town if you'd rather stay." Abigail looked ahead. "If I hide every time someone stares, I'll never stop hiding." He glanced toward her. "You've got more courage than most." She smiled faintly. "I'm just tired of being afraid." Thomas gave a slow nod. "I understand that." It was the first time he had admitted he understood anything about her. It mattered more than she expected. The wagon rolled into town just before noon. People noticed them immediately. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. The owner of the feed store greeted Thomas warmly. "Morning, Tom." Thomas tipped his hat. "Morning." The man's smile faded when he noticed Abigail climbing down from the wagon. His eyes lingered a second too long. "So she's staying out there?" Thomas answered calmly. "She works at the ranch." The storekeeper forced a polite smile. "If you say so." Abigail pretended to study the sacks of grain stacked nearby. She had seen those looks before. She knew exactly what they meant. Inside the general store, the whispers followed. A woman collecting flour leaned toward another customer. "That's her." I heard she was turned away in 3 towns. My husband said she brings bad luck. Abigail reached for a sack of coffee. Her hand trembled just enough for the tin scoop beside it to rattle. Before she could pull away, Thomas quietly picked up the coffee himself. "We'll take this one. Nothing more. No argument. No apology." He simply stood beside her. Sometimes that was enough. When they stepped back outside, Sheriff Amos Keller was waiting near the wagon. He removed his hat politely. "Thomas, Sheriff." The older man looked toward Abigail. "You settling in?" She answered honestly. "I'm trying." The sheriff studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I've seen towns ruin good people because they preferred gossip over truth." Thomas crossed his arms. "Is there something you came to say?" Amos reached into his coat. "I had a visitor yesterday." Thomas's expression sharpened. "The writers?" The sheriff nodded. "He was asking about Miss Turner." Abigail felt the warmth leave her face. "He found me. He found the town." Thomas looked directly at the sheriff. "What did he want?" The sheriff unfolded a letter. "He claimed this belongs to her." Abigail stared at the folded paper. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her breathing caught. "No." Thomas noticed. "You know it." She nodded slowly. "I hoped I'd never see that handwriting again." The sheriff held the letter out. "I didn't open it." Abigail hesitated before taking it. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Like it carried every painful memory she had tried to leave behind. She slipped it into her coat pocket without opening it. Thomas said nothing until they climbed back into the wagon. Only after Willow Creek disappeared behind them did he quietly ask, "You don't have to tell me." Abigail kept her eyes on the road. "I know." Another silence followed. Then she surprised herself. "But I want to." The horses walked slowly through the hills. The wind carried the smell of pine. Abigail held the unopened letter tightly. "My father wasn't a cruel man." Thomas listened without interrupting. "He was proud." She swallowed. "Too proud. When my mother died, he stopped seeing me as his daughter." Thomas frowned slightly. "He blamed you." "He blamed anyone he could." She looked toward the mountains. "When the crops failed, he said I brought misfortune. When the bank took the farm, he told everyone I was the reason." Thomas's hands tightened around the reins. "I believed him for a while." Her voice became almost a whisper. "If the people who raised you say you're worthless, eventually you stop arguing." Thomas looked straight ahead. "I don't believe that." Abigail blinked. "You barely know me." "I know enough." She looked at him. "How?" Thomas smiled faintly. "I've watched the way you treat people when you think nobody notices. The way you thank a leaner every morning. The way you fix things before anyone asks. The way you fed the smallest calf first yesterday." He looked at her for only a second. "Bad people don't usually worry about hungry animals." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. A real laugh. One she had not heard from herself in years. For the first time since arriving at Stone Hollow Ranch. She forgot what it felt like to be unwanted. That evening after supper, Abigail finally unfolded the letter. Thomas and Alina remained on the porch, giving her privacy. She carried the paper beneath the old cottonwood tree overlooking the pasture. The words were short, cold, and signed by her father. "Do not return. The family has moved on. There is nothing here waiting for you. Forget our name." Her hands slowly lowered. No tears came. Not this time. Instead, she folded the letter carefully. then walked back toward the porch. Thomas looked up. "You all right?" She placed the letter into the lantern flame. Neither of them spoke as the edges curled into ash. When only black flakes remained, Abigail watched the wind carry them into the dark. "They can't send me away anymore," she said softly. Thomas nodded. "No. For the first time. You decide where you belong. If you've ever had to leave behind words that tried to define your worth, tell us in the comments. Sometimes the strongest step forward begins by letting the past turn to ash." That night, neither Abigail nor Thomas noticed another fire glowing far beyond the northern ridge. 3 riders had stopped there. One of them held a worn photograph. The man looked from the picture toward Stone Hollow Ranch. Then he said quietly, "We found her. And this time, they were not coming with a letter. They were coming to take her back." 3 riders reached Willow Creek just after dawn. Their horses were covered in trail dust. The oldest of the men wore a long black coat despite the warming weather. His gray beard hid most of his face, but his sharp eyes missed nothing as he looked over the quiet street. They stopped outside the sheriff's office. Sheriff Amos Keller stepped onto the porch, resting one hand on the railing. "I don't believe I've seen you gentlemen before." The older rider removed his hat. "My name is Walter Briggs. What brings you to Willow Creek?" "We're looking for a young woman." Amos remained calm. "A lot of folks pass through here." Walter reached into his saddlebag and unfolded a small photograph. "Abigail, taken years earlier, before hardship had stolen the brightness from her smile. Her name is Abigail Turner." The sheriff looked at the picture for only a moment. "What business do you have with her?" Walter answered without hesitation. "She belongs with us." The words felt wrong. People did not belong to other people. Amos knew that. Still, he kept his voice steady. "If I happen to see her, I'll let her know someone came asking." Walter studied him carefully. "You do that?" But when the riders turned away, none of them believed the sheriff had told them the whole truth. At Stone Hollow Ranch, Abigail was hanging clean clothes on a line stretched between 2 cottonwood trees. The breeze lifted the sheets like white sails. For the first time in years, she caught herself humming a tune her mother used to sing. She stopped. It surprised her. She could not remember the last time a song had found its way into her heart. Thomas walked across the yard carrying a bundle of split firewood. "You sound happier." She smiled, slightly embarrassed. "I didn't realize I was singing." "I noticed." He stacked the wood beside the porch. "Eleanor says that's a good sign." Abigail laughed softly. "She notices everything." "She usually does." Eleanor opened the front door just then. "You two planning to work all morning?" Thomas looked toward her. "Unless breakfast has gotten cold." "It already has." The 3 of them shared a quiet laugh. It was a simple moment, the kind most people never remembered. Yet for Abigail it felt precious, because no one expected anything from her except to be herself. That afternoon, Thomas saddled 2 horses. "We're checking the north pasture." Abigail adjusted the saddle blanket carefully. "I'll be ready." They rode through rolling hills, where wildflowers still clung to the edges of the trails. The mountains stood tall beyond them, wrapped in pale blue haze. For a long time, they simply listened to the wind. Finally, Abigail spoke. "Why do you live alone?" Thomas kept his eyes ahead. "I wasn't always alone." She waited. Years had taught her not to rush someone else's pain. After a while, he continued. "My wife died during a harsh winter." Abigail looked at him quietly. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "So am I." The ranch never felt the same afterward. He smiled sadly. "People kept telling me to move on." "Did you?" "No." He looked across the open valley. I learned something instead. What? You don't stop loving someone. You simply learn how to carry the love without letting it crush you. Abigail looked down at the reins in her hands. I've been carrying fear the same way. Thomas turned toward her. Then maybe it's time to put some of it down. His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. When they returned near sunset, Sheriff Amos was waiting at the gate. Thomas climbed down first. Everything all right? The sheriff looked uneasy. The riders came back. Abigail's smile disappeared. They're still here. They're asking questions. Thomas folded his arms. What kind of questions? They claim Abigail left something that belongs to them. Abigail stepped forward. I left nothing. Amos nodded. I figured as much. He lowered his voice. But they aren't planning to leave quietly. Eleanor came onto the porch. They're bullies. Thomas looked toward the sheriff. What do they really want? Amos hesitated. I don't know. And that worries me. That evening the ranch felt different. The wind seemed colder. Even the horses shifted nervously inside the barn. After supper, Eleanor went to bed early. Thomas remained on the porch, repairing an old lantern. Abigail sat beside him. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt safe. After several minutes she asked, Can I tell you something? He set the lantern aside. You can tell me anything. She took a slow breath. When I was 16, my father borrowed money. Thomas listened. He couldn't repay it. So he promised I would marry the lender's son. Thomas's jaw tightened. I refused. My father never forgave me. She stared into the darkness beyond the yard. That family lost their land a few years later. They blamed me. The men looking for me. They're connected to them. Thomas understood now. They're not here because of property. She nodded. They want someone to blame. Neither of them spoke. The crickets sang in the grass. A lantern swayed gently above the porch. Finally, Thomas said, You aren't going anywhere. Abigail looked at him. You don't know what trouble this could bring. I do. You could lose the ranch. I've rebuilt this place before. His eyes met hers. I won't rebuild my conscience. Abigail felt tears rise. Not because she was afraid. Because no one had ever chosen to stand beside her before. She quickly looked away. I don't deserve this. Thomas answered so quietly she almost missed it. Stop deciding your worth by the people who failed to see it. Those words reached a place inside her that years of rejection had never touched. The next morning, trouble arrived. The three riders entered the ranch without asking permission. Walter Briggs rode at the front. He stopped only a few yards from the porch. Thomas stepped into the yard. This is private land. Walter looked past him. We're here for the girl. Abigail came out of the house before Thomas could stop her. I'm not a girl. Walter's eyes narrowed. You've caused enough damage. I caused nothing. You ruined an agreement. I refuse to be traded. The younger rider laughed harshly. You still think you had a choice. Thomas took one slow step forward. She has one now. Walter's gaze shifted toward him. This doesn't concern you. Thomas remained calm. It concerns me because you're standing on my land, frightening someone under my protection. The air became very still. Even the horses seemed to stop moving. Walter climbed down from his saddle. You willing to fight over someone nobody else wanted? Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to Abigail's side. Without a single word. He reached for a trembling hand. She looked at him in surprise. His grip was steady, warm, certain. He wasn't holding her because she was weak. He was reminding everyone watching that she was not alone. Walter shook his head. You don't even know who she is. Thomas looked directly at him. I know exactly who she is. The older man laughed. No. You know who she pretends to be. Thomas's voice remained calm enough for everyone to hear. I know she's honest. I know she works harder than anyone on this ranch. I know she treats people with kindness even after the world forgot to show it to her. He tightened his hold on Abigail's hand just slightly. And I know something else. Walter frowned. What? Thomas looked at Abigail before answering. Then he spoke words she never believed anyone would ever say to her. I don't see someone broken. I don't see someone unwanted. I see a woman of courage. His eyes never left hers. And to me, you're exactly the way God meant you to be. Abigail's breath caught. Years of cruel words echoed through her memory. Worthless, burdened, mistake, unwanted. One sentence had begun to silence them all. If this moment touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Sometimes one honest voice can quiet years of doubt. But before another word could be spoken, a rider came racing toward the ranch from Willow Creek. His horse was lathered with sweat. He barely stopped before shouting, Thomas, the sheriff needs you. There's something in town you have to see. Thomas turned slowly. The urgency in the rider's face told him this was no ordinary message. And whatever waited in Willow Creek was about to reveal the truth that none of them had expected. Thomas looked at Abigail for only a moment before turning toward the rider. What happened? The young man caught his breath. Sheriff Keller asked for both of you. Now, Walter Briggs folded his arms. Looks like someone finally uncovered the truth. Thomas ignored him. He helped Abigail onto her horse before climbing onto his own. Walter and the other two riders followed at a distance, certain they were about to prove their claims. The road into Willow Creek felt longer than ever. Neither Thomas nor Abigail spoke. The only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves against the hard earth. As the town came into view, Abigail noticed people gathering outside the church. Men stood with their hats in their hands. Women whispered quietly. Even the children sensed something important was about to happen. Sheriff Amos Keller waited on the church steps with an elderly gentleman dressed in a dark wool coat. His silver spectacles rested low on his nose, and he held a weathered leather case beneath one arm. When Thomas and Abigail approached, Amos stepped forward. Thank you for coming. Abigail looked at the unfamiliar man. Who is he? The sheriff answered gently. This is Judge Benjamin Carter. The judge tipped his hat respectfully. Miss Turner. Abigail returned the gesture. Sir. Judge Carter opened the leather case and carefully removed several folded documents. I've spent the last month reviewing records from Dry River County. Walter Briggs shifted uneasily. The judge continued. Some records were hidden. Others were altered. But the truth has a way of surviving. The crowd fell completely silent. Judge Carter looked directly at Abigail. Years ago, your late mother placed part of your grandfather's ranch in your name. Abigail frowned. My father said there was nothing left. He lied. A murmur spread through the crowd. Walter's face hardened. Judge Carter unfolded another document. When your father borrowed money, he attempted to sign away land that did not legally belong to him. He looked toward Walter. The agreement your family relied upon was never valid. Walter stepped forward. That's impossible. Judge Carter calmly handed one paper to Sheriff Keller. The county seal says otherwise. Amos examined it carefully before nodding. It's authentic. Walter's confidence began to disappear. He glanced at the other writers, but neither man met his eyes. The truth had finally caught up with them. Judge Carter continued. Miss Turner refused a marriage that the law could never have required. You committed no wrong. You owed no debt. And you were never responsible for your father's choices. Abigail stood motionless. For years she had carried guilt that had never belonged to her. Now, in only a few moments, it was lifted away. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not born from pain. They came from relief. Walter took another step forward. So that's it. We ride all this way for nothing. Sheriff Keller stood between him and Abigail. No. You rode all this way chasing someone who never owed you anything. Walter looked around. The townspeople who had once whispered now watched him in silence. The storekeeper lowered his eyes. The woman who had refused Abigail's service looked ashamed. Even those who had believed the rumors could no longer ignore the truth. Walter slowly placed his hat back on his head. Without another word, he turned toward his horse. The other riders followed. No one tried to stop them. They left Willow Creek as quietly as they had arrived. Sometimes justice did not need raised voices. Sometimes the truth was enough. The crowd remained where it was. No one seemed eager to leave. Finally, the church pastor stepped forward. I think some of us owe this young woman an apology. The silence that followed felt heavy. Then the owner of the general store removed his hat. I judged you before I knew you. I'm sorry. The woman from the cafe stepped closer. So did I. One by one, others spoke. Not because they were forced. Because they finally understood the weight of what they had done. Abigail listened quietly. Then she smiled. You don't owe me perfect words. You only owe the next stranger a fair chance. No one answered immediately. Many simply lowered their heads. Those words would stay with Willow Creek long after that day ended. Late that afternoon, Thomas and Abigail started the ride back to Stone Hollow Ranch. The golden light stretched across the fields. The same road felt different now. Not because the land had changed. Because Abigail had. Halfway home, they stopped beside a small creek where cottonwood leaves drifted across the water. Thomas climbed down first. He helped Abigail from her horse. For a while, they simply listened to the stream. I kept waiting, Abigail said quietly. For what? For someone to tell me I deserved to stay. Thomas smiled. And now? She looked across the water. I finally understand. No one else gets to decide where I belong. Thomas nodded. That's something each person has to discover. She turned toward him. You knew that before I did. I learned it the hard way. Abigail reached into the pocket of her dress. She pulled out the little silver button she had carried since childhood. My mother used to tell me that whenever I felt alone, I should hold this. She laughed softly. I thought it was just an old button. Thomas studied it carefully. No, it's a reminder. Of what? That the people who truly love us leave more than memories. They leave courage. Abigail closed her fingers around it one last time before slipping it back into her pocket. When they reached the ranch, Alina was waiting on the porch. She smiled the moment she saw them. I've had supper keeping warm for an hour. Thomas laughed. Then we'd better not keep it waiting. The three of them sat around the worn wooden table as evening settled over Stone Hollow. There was fresh bread, beef stew, warm coffee, nothing fancy, everything meaningful. After supper, Alina quietly stood. I believe you two should take a walk. Thomas looked at her knowingly. Was that an order? It was. She disappeared into the house, smiling to herself. The sky above the pasture was filled with stars. A cool breeze moved through the grass. The horses grazed peacefully beyond the fence. Thomas and Abigail walked without speaking until they reached the old oak tree overlooking the valley. Abigail stopped. "When I first came here, I expected you to send me away." Thomas smiled gently. "I remembered. I almost left that first night." "I know." She looked at him in surprise. "You knew?" "I heard the front door open. Why didn't you stop me?" Thomas looked across the moonlit fields. "Because home only means something when someone chooses it." Abigail's eyes filled once more. This time she did not hide the tears. Thomas turned toward her. "You once asked me why I gave you a chance." "I did." He took one careful step closer. "Would you like the honest answer?" She nodded. "The day you arrived, everyone else looked at your past. I watched how you returned a little girl's dropped ribbon before anyone noticed. You thought nobody saw you. I did. You looked tired. You looked lonely. But you never stopped being kind." He smiled warmly. "That's the sort of person I wanted beside me." Abigail felt years of loneliness begin to melt away. Thomas gently reached for her hand. She placed hers in his without hesitation. He looked into her eyes and spoke the words she would remember for the rest of her life. "Abigail, the world measured you by rumors. I measured you by your heart." He smiled. "And to me, you're perfect just as you are." A tear slipped down Abigail's cheek. Not because she needed someone to tell her she had worth, but because at last she believed it herself. She stepped a little closer. The wind rustled the oak leaves overhead as they stood hand in hand, looking across the valley that had become home. Months later, travelers passing through Willow Creek often spoke about Stone Hollow Ranch. Not because it was the largest ranch, not because it was the richest, but because it had become known as the place where anyone willing to work honestly would be treated with dignity. People who had nowhere else to go found fair wages, warm meals, and respect. The town slowly changed as well. Neighbors judged less quickly. Doors opened a little more easily. And when newcomers arrived carrying only a small bag and uncertain hope, someone usually smiled first instead of whispering. If this story reminded you that one act of kindness can change an entire life, thank you for staying until the end. Subscribe for more heartfelt Wild West stories where courage, compassion, and hope ride together across the frontier. Far beyond the hills, the sun slipped below the horizon. The lantern on the porch of Stone Hollow Ranch glowed warmly in the growing darkness. And for the first time in many years, Abigail no longer wondered where she belonged. She was already home,